has played out. Um, and I mean, reading different analyst notes. I mean, just listening to different takes on this. I mean, I don't feel like there's really anybody that is expecting the quarter to not be just fantastic. Um, as you mentioned in like the summary slide, I mean, one of the big things people are going to look at is obviously the guidance. Um, just a couple of months ago, or maybe a month ago, there was the talk around the Blackwell delay, and while that has been, it's been pretty well communicated, and I've seen a lot of people mention it as maybe a little bit of reason for caution ahead of this report. I think the truth is people just don't really know what type of impact that delay is going to have, right? And I think when you look at Nvidia after where it was a couple weeks ago on that that Black Monday per se. I mean, that was down in the 90s, and now it's up in like I mean, as of right now, it's like close to 126. So I think what it really comes down to is just the bar has gotten a little bit higher, even though people realize that the Blackwell delay it might kind of like push out the estimates a bit. It's not really going to change the overall narrative, which is, I mean, demand for Nvidia's chips is just through the roof, and whether it's like a 1 month, 2 month, 3 month delay to like the Blackwell ramp, I mean, I don't think there's anybody that doesn't expect the Blackwell ramp to be significant. So to me, like this setup, just it really all comes down to positioning. I mean, expectations are still pretty high. And even if like the guidance is slightly underwhelming just due to like the timing of that Blackwell delay, I mean, overall, it seems like it's still going to be a go-to name. I mean, I think it would truly be surprising if Nvidia signaled, like a kind of like a waning in demand, just because I don't think anybody is anticipating that at this point. So really, to me, it just all comes down to like the setup and how expectations, even though, I mean, people are expecting a bit of like delay, I mean, they're still pretty high, right? I mean, it's hard to make the argument that expectations on Nvidia aren't high.
Yeah, definitely. Christian, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh, yeah, I thought Dan did great. Yeah, because right out of the gate, we'll start separating ourselves as the different kind of way we look at things. I tend to look at things very differently, as in I couldn't tell you anything about expectations for Nvidia, what they have or have not done, so forth and so on. Other than the obvious, I am truly a technical analyst at heart, so I really focus more on the stock, not the company. And in my experience over the years, there's a bull and a bear on every side, right? And none of us know how a stock is going to react to a company's earnings, so it could be great. As Dan knows, stock could drop, right? It could be terrible, stock could pop and all that. So I don't focus too much on companies as much as I do, the stock, or as I always like to say, we're not really trading the company, we're actually trading the stock. So I kind of go back and just kind of look, it's like, well, how have Nvidia's earnings been being received? I also like to take a look at the space. So for example, before you ever put that graphic up, I looked back, I'm like, oh, last time Nvidia 10% move-ish, before that 15% move-ish, before that a couple percent, maybe 10%ish, right? So I kind of just use that basic back of the napkin. So we look at this one and we say to ourselves, all things being equal, maybe a similar type move. The thing that I do find interesting, again, as just, a chart guy looking at it, when you look at a lot of the big dogs that are in that space that were kind of riding that wave for so long, I think it's interesting to note some of the ones that might pop into, a listener or viewer's mind might be like Micron, might be AMD, might be, as you mentioned earlier, SMCI. All of them already in down moves. Already, most of them have been trending lower for a while. And flash back 4 or 5 months or so, I remember speaking to my audience and saying, look, I'm not going to sit there and try to tell you that AI is going to die or that it's going to turn into Skynet, right? What I can tell you is that I've never seen a chart in history that did this, that didn't eventually do that, right? And so at some point, the air is going to come out of that. And it seems like it has happened to virtually everyone except NVIDIA. So just as an, as a, neutral observer, I ask myself, is Nvidia the last one charging up the field, and now is Nvidia going to follow, or can Nvidia kind of reinvigorate the space? So where I do obviously fall right in line with Dan would be simply, it is about the setup. For me, it would never be about taking a side, just because I've learned that no telling what's going to happen, right? Same thing with a jobs report, FOMC statement. So I tend to see if there's an opportunity there, based on the option pricing and the expected move and things of that nature. So, but yeah, I think I'll trust Dan and everything as far as the company goes.
No, I actually, yeah, no, it's funny. So
keep going.
So a lot of what I do is actually kind of similar. It's more about, it's definitely a lot less directional for events and earnings specifically. It's more about, what's the history of movement on that name. I really do truly look at just more of like the setup based off of, okay, what are the options pricing in? What has the stock done in the past? Like what's like what's the setup like technically, as you said? Because I mean, I think when people get down to like trying to just bet on the direction of movement, it just, you kind of lose an edge, because I mean, there's great setups, like you said, where like, company can beat and the stock trades lower. And then there's the opposite, where it's kind of a lousy print and all of a sudden the stock gaps up. So it's more about like what you're saying. It's like, it's the technical setup. It's what the stock has done historically on earnings. It's what's the options, what the options are pricing in. And I think when you take all that to consideration, it kind of gives you a better feel for what type of risk, if any, you want to take into the report, not just, trying to bet on like heads or tails, right? Whether it goes up or down.
Totally. When you look at the Nvidia chart, we've obviously had this very sharp V bottom back on August 5th with the rest of the market. Nvidia was down at $91, and then now we're up here at $126 today. We're getting a little bit of a pullback today, I think, headed into earnings, people, profit taking, things like that. So for each of you, when you're looking at this chart, where do you feel like there's more downside risk for Nvidia because of the recovery that we've seen? Like, they have to beat so strongly to get the kind of move higher that the market might be looking for?
Yeah, I do think so. I tend to, again, look at the everything within context. So I ask myself how the space is performing. I think overall market. So good things tend to happen to, quote, good stocks, right? Bad things tend to happen to bad stocks. So maybe the exact same, jobs report in the middle of a bear market, you'll probably see a different market reaction than you would have seen in a bull market, right? Just because of context. To me, it seems like Nvidia wants to go higher. If you look over the past couple of weeks, clearly seems to have a problem with 130. It's not dropping away from it. So you look at SMCI, you look at MU, you look at AMD, you look at all these other guys that are kind of falling away. Part of that, obviously, if you look at the NASDAQ itself, right, the rising or receding tide, but Nvidia keeps hanging on. So we have to ask ourselves, I think you have to ask yourself, why do you believe Nvidia is hanging on? Do you think it's hanging on because that's the bullish brew, right? And nope, I'm not getting out. No, I want to be in. Or do we think we're going to run out of gas here? When I look at that, if you told me to look at that in a vacuum, I'd say that's a stock that wants to break higher, wants to.
Dan, would you agree?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I definitely echo like the same sentiments. I mean, it feels like it wants to go higher, and I do wonder if some of that is also related to like the really sharp V reversal, right? When after the indices began to bottom, there was a lot of like either people were just positioned poorly, or there was some chasing going on, right? So when you had like that Monday crash and then like the subsequent bounce, like I wonder if there was a lot of positioning that kind of flooded into like the mega caps again, because people were worried that they can't miss a potential I mean, if they benchmark to specific like specific indice, right, or like some sort of like sector, they didn't want to be at risk of like lightening up and then watching it be reversed and continue to head higher. So I wonder if like there was some crowding into like the mega caps, which also kept Nvidia so much stronger than, as Christian mentioned, like some of the other peers in like the semi space or like AI. I mean, SMCI's had a string of bad news. But even if you look at like other AI chip related semis more broadly, I mean, there are some that really have not had nearly as impressive of recovery as Nvidia. So, you know, I do wonder if some like positioning has also played into that, you know, like some more like passive positioning, people that were worried about possibly underperforming like their benchmarks when that V reversal began to take shape. So, but I think like it does look like to me as well, like a stock that wants to trade higher. And, you know, just looking at the chart, I mean, it seems like down around like the 120 area, there seems to be some, at least over the last like 3 to 4 months, there seems to be some real buying interest. So it's a little bit above that now, but I mean, it does look like, you know, down into the 120s, there have been some active buyers there over the last few months.
Before we move on to some of the sympathy plays that could happen from Nvidia, we have a question from Karen. She wants to know if you have an options trade into earnings tonight that you could share, and either of you. Even if you don't have a specific position on yourself, but if you were to be taking a trade, where would you guys look?
You know, it's funny. I just yesterday, when I was speaking to like our chat room, I was actually saying like coming into the week, I was on the fence. Like, you know, there were some things that interested me, like AMD was one of them. It's kind of like a sympathy play on Nvidia, but into the week, I have started to like dial back my expectations a bit. And as it stands right now, I feel like personally, I'm going to be avoiding Nvidia specifically, but also things that may have a relationship or may move off of the Nvidia print too. I don't have a great feel for it, and even though I realize like the importance of it to the overall tape in the sector, I don't like how there's some deterioration in other names, and to me, like I don't have an edge, so I think personally, like I'd rather just save my money, see what happens, and see where they open tomorrow, and maybe sets up a day trade or a short swing trade.
Christian?
Yeah, like I said, we go back to full circle here. It's a little different.
Yeah, what are you doing for Nvidia earnings?
So it's, you know, context is key. In my rooms and such, it is very much probably a little bit closer to the wild, wild west. You know, kind of we look for, and what I mean by that is we immediately, you know, zoned in on SMCI. We were already watching that. A big part of what I do when it comes to options trading, I lean very heavily on not only the stock and the chart to make a lot of options decisions, but also volatility is a big thing. I don't do a lot of spreads. I don't do a lot of, let's just say, it's not really weighted towards as much the risk component is the profit component. So where can we get the wildest moves? Now, we would never trade Nvidia going into earnings itself, just because you know how it's going to go, right? First thing tomorrow, you're going to lose half or more of your premium just because volatility, right? Getting sucked out. So we don't want that. We don't want to be kind of, you know, taking a 50% loss no matter what happens. So what we will tend to do, and this probably segues into your, you know, your sympathy play. We full disclosure, in one of our rooms, we're already in AMD, but we put that position on Monday to get going. And then we went ahead and took a shot at SMCI. We're going to ride that into earnings. But it's to be clear, it's not directional. So what we look to do is try to capitalize on volatility, and it's a roadmap for 3 days. So as we're exactly as Dan said, we're going to wait till this settles out. You know, we're going to wait till some of this, you know, air comes out of it. But for us, it'll be, well, we're going to look at those sympathy plays and say, who do we think is going to give us, you know, a lot of crazy time going into first thing tomorrow. So SMI, AMD, and we were targeting a little bit on Micron as well.
Yep. So there you go. The sympathy plays off Nvidia earnings. You know, you would look at AMD, Micron, possibly SMH, you know, the sector, and then StockSell is going to be kind of your what is it? Your leverage fund for the sector as a whole too. That's going to be your 3x leverage there. So when it comes to looking at sympathy plays, Christian, like you mentioned, a lot of these names, AMD, Micron, they've been a lot weaker than Nvidia. We've been seeing the pullback. Do either of you think that Karen said SMCI is a no-go going down, but what about selling a credit put spread. So let's address that specifically, maybe. So here you guys can read that if you want. SMCI is no-go going down. Of course, we saw the news on SMCI this morning. We could talk about that in a bit. We could talk about it now. Doesn't matter. But what about selling a credit put spread? Do either of you have any opinion on that for SMCI ahead of Nvidia's earnings?
Go ahead. I'll let you go first, Dan.
I mean, on one hand, I suppose. I suppose like the fact that the risk is capped is would be more attractive to me, but I guess overall, I mean, you're still picking a direction, and I mean, I guess from in my perspective, after today's news on SMCI, I just don't know if I'd be comfortable with that direction. I mean, yes, it might have like a nice bounce. Those put spreads might lose most of their value, but you know what happens if Nvidia is surprisingly disappointed and the stock trades lower.
Right.
So I personally don't think I would want to go that route, but I do think it's at least your risk is defined versus just selling naked puts, right? I mean, at least like you're like, you know, if all else goes wrong against you, I mean, like the max you can lose is capped by the spread. So you know, if that's something you've been looking at, something you lined up, you're comfortable with the risk, maybe it's something you move forward with. But I just don't know. I mean, today's headline to me seems it seems like it could have an impact on the stock for a little while, and I'm just not sure that all that and taking all that consideration that selling put spreads is something I want to be involved with right at this moment.
Christian, any thoughts?
Sure, several. I'll start with, hopefully I understood that question, because I thought I read that the question was a no-go because the stock is dropping. But if I read that correctly, that's a bullish play that's being put on.
Yeah.
So I guess I would say my first response to that, if it was a student or member, I would say if you're bearish on that stock, I don't know that I'd be putting on a bullish play. That would be the first thing I would recommend. The second thing I would say is that I would the stock dropping would not prohibit you in any way, shape, or form of trading it, right? Up, down, completely irrelevant, right? A lot of strategies where it doesn't matter. So what you would want to do is look at it and say, could I capitalize on this one way or another? Certainly, if you're bullish on Nvidia, I don't know that, you know, again, if you think SMCI, yucky, well, that's probably not the one you'd want to buy calls on. SMCI for us, it is the dropping of any stock, to be quite honest with you, in the market itself that we love, because what has happened there is volatility is picked up. And this presents not only an opportunity to really capitalize on the downside, but it also presents a great opportunity for us to hedge ourselves in a different way, right? So as Dan mentioned, with that type of a strategy, you have a defined risk, but usually it's not necessarily, depending on what spread we're talking about, a lot of times the run of the mill, it's not a great risk reward. So what we put ourselves in position to do is we like to be on both sides of it. So we do a lot of strangle-esque type strategies. Sometimes we're biased to one side or the other. When SMCI broke 700 just a few weeks or a couple months ago, our target has always been 355. So if you look at the past year and a half, you'll see a pretty good breakout point above 355. We think there's an opportunity SMCI can get there, especially if there's a negative reaction. If everyone looks at all the sympathy plays from Nvidia's last earnings, Nvidia and everybody jumped, only Nvidia held. Everybody else dropped. So again, psyche of the market. What is the market telling me when it says, "Hey, I like everybody. Never mind, we like one." So we see an opportunity on the downside of SMCI, but because of its volatility, like we were like, "Thank you" when the news came out this week, because the volatility is picking up more. It really creates an opportunity for us to maybe even put a bullish play on that protects us if it goes the opposite direction. So on one hand, we're neutral, but we're very loaded on both sides.
All right. So when it comes to these sympathy plays, like we mentioned, things have been not so great in this sector, except for Nvidia being the leader, but all these other plays are kind of down. Do either of you think that Nvidia could be kind of the rising tide for, say, the AMDs, the Microns of the market? If the report comes out how the market wants? I know, Christian, you're not at your, the price. You just look at the price. But Dan, any thoughts on, the ability of Nvidia to be the rising tide for these other names?
I think Maybe in the short term, less so, but I think over a couple months, a few months. I mean, I think really what it comes down to is just maintaining the narrative, right? Nvidia, I call it the Pied Piper of tech, and it's definitely the Pied Piper of AI. So, you know, if Nvidia is singing a good tune, then I think that the AI names will remain in play. How they fare today, or even like the next couple of weeks, I think there's a lot of factors at play, right? I mean, you have Nvidia earnings, but then next week you have the September jobs report. Week after that, well, the Fed meeting is coming up. So you have the September jobs report, you have the Fed meeting, you have the September CPI. It's like all these things are going to have an impact on the overall tape. But I think really, if Nvidia has like a good quarter, I think it keeps like the sentiment positive in the AI plays, and I mean maybe some names like Micron, because I think earnings are still coming up from that one. If those are good, then that helps. I think AMD is in a position to maybe capitalize. But yeah, I mean I guess I can't separate myself from the suspicion that there could be some more muted reactions this week.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of playing into like my kind of like lukewarm opinion here. But I do think overall, I mean, if Nvidia has a lot of very positive commentary and gives a strong forecast, even if the stocks don't react particularly well today, tomorrow, the remainder of this week, I think that's probably something people that can really sink their teeth into and say like, okay, we still have confidence in this trade. This group of names can continue to work higher or maybe repair. Some of them actually look pretty broken right now. And I think, down the road, depending on how like September plays out and the election, I mean, there's a lot of variables, but I think that that's a trade that can continue to work.
Mm-hmm. Great. Oh.
Yeah, I guess I'll answer that the different way again.
Yeah.
When you first asked the question, again, conceding that we never know, right? It's just so hard to know how things are going to go. But I use the example of like, say, a sector rotation model, right? A sector rotation model very rarely, if ever, plays out perfectly, right? But it kind of gives us some hints. And a lot of times, the whole thing about it rhymes, right? So when we look at the overall market, sometimes when we see a market going very, very well, going very, very bullish, right? Well, you'll tend to see a lot of times you might tend to see, as we call it, those soldiers stop following the generals, right? That's the generic way we look at it. So if we see some of these big cap names and just fewer and fewer of the smaller names are following, that would be a concern to us, right? That would be a concern, like that army charging down the field. The generals are going, they turn around and look and, oh my gosh, we don't have any more soldiers, right? What will tend to happen? Oops, never mind. We don't want to fight. We're going to go the other direction. And we will tend to see that same type of phenomena from time to time at bottoms, right? Who are the first ones that come out of those bottoms? A lot of times it's the strong, the leaders, and they start to lead us back out. So when you look at those two outcomes, I would say with Nvidia having moved higher, and let's just call that the general, and none of the soldiers following lately, that would kind of lead me to a little bit of a concern, or just kind of like I wonder if the market's telling us we're done with this space. The general is the only thing left to fall. So I don't know that it can lift. If it couldn't lift it last time, I don't know that I can see it lifting the whole space this time, but hey, that's what makes the market.
Yeah, totally. All right. So before we close things out here, I just want to let the audience kind of get a feel for each of you and your styles. I think we've gotten some of that in this discussion, but let's start with Dan. Kind of lay out who you are as an options trader for the audience, and what Dan, for everyone, is a moderator in the Alpha Team virtual trading floor alongside Scott Redler. So that's where he is day in and day out, and that's where you can see or get more from Dan and his trades. But talk about your style and what you do, and how you use options in your trade.
So it's a little bit of a few things. I definitely, as this conversation kind of alluded to, I mean, I definitely do quite a bit of event style trading. So whether that's like earnings or I am pretty active with like biotech events, which I find even more than earnings, biotech events can really be like an options trader paradise just based off like the typical moves and you know, option wise what's expected. But then also I do a fair amount of day trading options. So I like to focus on stuff that's in the news. So whether that's news that day or breaking news intraday. So I mean, sometimes that revolves around like scalping. So like the holding period could be anywhere from a couple minutes to maybe a couple hours. But you know, depending on the environment, you know, there might be some like mid-range swings anywhere from like a few days to a couple weeks. When volatility is higher, I do tend to dial back like the swing style trades just because, you know, volatility is higher, visibility is lower. So, you know, kind of looking out over like a week or two is a little bit tougher. So when, you know, when volatility is higher, I feel like my focus tends to be more on like intraday, maybe overnight if something has turned into like a good position. But generally I'd say like most of my style is event trading, and then more of like the short time frame. In a more supportive environment, like when we're in like a trending tape, then it could turn more into like that mid-range swing style. But very, very heavy options focus for me.
All right, and then Christian, talk about your stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique style that I employ. Kind of surprising at first to many. I guess if I broke it down into its parts, first and foremost, I'm a huge fan of just getting back to the basics of sound trading. I think with all the access to technology and trading platforms and a lot of bad actors in our group, obviously, you know, we can tend to overcomplicate things. And at the end of the day, whether you're talking about a business or a sport or trading, you can't get around the fact that it's the basics and the fundamentals and those core pillars of trading that will lead to your success, not a lot of the fringe stuff that might be out there. So my trading is very much focused on, first off, hey, look, if you're managing risk, if you're in great risk reward setups, if you've got good position size, if you're able to control emotion, at the end of the day, you've got 80+% of this licked, right? As where most will tend to focus on some indicator somebody told them about. And unfortunately, not knowing that that indicator is never going to make you money, right? If you can't manage risk, if you can't get position size, yada, yada. So when you focus on those, then you bring it in. I focus my options trading very heavily on what is on the chart, right? I always loved the phrase price is the only thing that pays, right? So the delta didn't pay you, the VWAP didn't pay you, moving average didn't pay you, and I promise you the gamma didn't pay you. What pays you or takes your money is what price does. So first and foremost in my trading style is that can we get the market right, right? Everybody in this country could have blindly closed their eyes, and if they thought the market was going to drop today and they just bought puts on stuff, they probably made money, right? Because they got the price of the market right. So we do that and we apply that to the stocks as well, and we lean very heavily on it, and that's why we look for volatility. With my options trading, very similar to Dan's, I tend to excel mostly in that 2 to 4 day time frame. I don't know if I'd call it swing. I don't know if I'd call it scalping. I'm not trying to day trade. We get some of our biggest gains overnight and such. But I do keep, again, the options trading simple. Calls, puts, definitely want to manage risk. But as I always say is big winners solve a lot of problems, right? So we do try to take our shots. And I never use Greeks. I don't look at historic volatility, implied volatility. In the simplest form, I always say, hey, look, if I buy the 100 calls when the stock's at 100 for $1 and that stock goes to 105, nothing's going to change the fact I made 400%. So really focus on those types of things. And I think that's why a lot of the attendees and the members do well. So it's different. It's fun. It's exciting. Not for the faint of heart, but we do really well.
All right. Any final thoughts for either of you before NVIDIA's earnings report coming up in, it's 1:30, so probably like 3-ish hours. I think they're a little bit after the market close, but any final thoughts for either of you?
I would say one, if Nvidia looks like it's going to close above 130 tomorrow, probably heading off to new highs. I would put that out there. And if SMCI fails to hold 400 today, look at that 355 as a target on the downside.
Okay. Dan, any levels that you're looking at?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different, but I think when I last checked, the Q straddle for tomorrow was about $9. So if Nvidia has a muted reaction, something like I'm taking a look at is possibly lining up some calendars to like sell shorter term expiration, maybe through like the remainder of this week, and then buy maybe premium out through the jobs report. Thinking that if Nvidia's earnings fail to really spark a major move, we might see some extended chop with that jobs report really delivering maybe a big catalyst for the overall tape. So something to consider. You know, there's some variables there, but if you see a more muted reaction to Nvidia, maybe look at some calendars, selling short-term premium, buying like premium out like a week and a half.
All right, cool. All right, so for everyone who's with us live, if you would like to work with either of these traders, we have two options for you. You can go to t3live.com/optionslive to get Christian's strategy, his training on his strategy for free, or you go to t3live.com/alpha to work with Dan in the Alpha Team virtual trading floor. Again, that's alongside Scott Redler. That's where Dan is every single day making his trades and running the room there with Scott. But that is where these guys are working. Christian runs some other rooms as well, but this is our offer today is t3live.com/optionslive. You get his training for free, and then you can learn more about what he does and your opportunity is to work with him. And then t3live.com/alpha to see Dan in action in the Alpha Team with Scott. This was a great discussion, guys. It was really great to have you both on, and hope you have a great rest of your trading day.
Thanks, Greta.
Appreciate it. Yeah, good luck.
Good luck, Dan.
Bye.